It's not easy to learn how to read Chinese. You've got thousands of characters to deal with, and there are new and obscure words all over the place. The thing is that the best way to learn how to read is to learn how to write. And yeah, I'm talking about writing by hand. The most effective and fastest way to become literate in Chinese is to immerse yourself in the world of characters. And today I'm going to show you how to do that. Alright guys, today I'm going to show you how I approach learning Chinese characters. I'm not going to show you like the stroke order and all that stuff. There's plenty of other channels out there. Instead, we're talking about the strategy, the way to go about this, and how you can use Anki to get this to work. But first of all, I'll give you a little word from my sponsor, which happens to be me. So there are two ways you can do this. First of all, of course, through YouTube memberships. Members get early access to videos. You can watch it as soon as I'm done making it. Second, please consider becoming a paying subscriber over at my Dream of the Red Chamber project. So this is different than an ordinary translation. This is a living translation, which means you can say whatever it is you want to say to me. So the thing about this translation is that if you disagree with like how I've worded something, if you disagree with the way it's translated, if I made a mistake, you can tell me. And the thing is that I make a lot of mistakes. You can find some that I actually haven't gone back to fix quite yet. This happens all the time, and it happens because like, I don't know, like my eyes were on the wrong part of the page. I confused two characters. This sort of stuff happens all the time. If you got a question about something, you can ask me. And when it comes to the books on your shelf, you can't do that. They won't talk with you. Anyway, both of these membership options are about $5 a month. Your support would really mean a lot to me. In fact, your support makes it possible for me to continue spending time and effort doing this project. Alright, so if you're watching this, I'm assuming that you've got at least some level of interest in Chinese literature. And if that's the case, I've got to assume that you're interested in learning how to read Chinese. Is that right? I mean, truth be told, you can get along just fine in a Chinese-speaking environment without learning a single character. You honestly don't need to know how to read to figure out how to haggle prices, how to order food, and how to do most of the day-to-day things you need to live in China. But then again, you won't be able to read Chinese if you don't actually learn how to read Chinese characters. So at some point in time, if you're learning a language like Chinese, it doesn't really matter what language it is, right? Korean, Japanese, if you're learning Swahili or Russian or whatever, it's all the same thing. At some point in time, you have to figure out what your goals in learning the language actually are. The truth is that Chinese is just like any other language out there. So if you just want to know how to say hello and carry on like a really shallow conversation, you're naturally not going to need to learn how to read. But if you're going to go deeper in the language, which you should want to do, I hope, you're going to have to come to terms with the characters sooner or later. Of course, the extent to which you take studying Chinese characters seriously is directly related to precisely what you want to read. This Chinese translation of the old Japanese manga Slam Dunk is probably not going to really test your Chinese reading skills. You'll likely need quite a bit more time if you're going to take the Hanyu Shuiping Kaoshi. This is from a book that I used to prepare for that test 20 years ago. Of course, to fluently read a novel like this, you will need some more advanced vocabulary. And if you're thinking about classical poetry, you will need quite a bit more, and that's where the stuff becomes really complex. So what we're talking about here actually are different registers of the language. So every language has different spoken registers. You wouldn't want to talk with like the head of state the same way you would talk to a child, at least in most countries. Maybe in the United States it's a little bit different. Anyway, to be able to read fluently at different levels or registers of Chinese, you've got to establish your competency at the lower level first, and then work your way up gradually until you've got enough character recognition to be able to get to the really hard stuff. This is one of the reasons I strongly advise anyone to start learning Chinese characters from the beginning of their learning journey, even if you think you won't need to learn how to read. The problem is that it's going to be much more difficult and really painful to have to relearn the basics if you've already made significant progress in learning spoken Chinese. And yeah, when I'm talking about learning how to read, I'm also talking about learning how to write. So there's apparently quite a few of you out there who think that you don't need to learn how to write to be able to read. Now, I'll be honest with you, in like real life, I have never met somebody who was able to learn how to read Chinese without being able to write. I mean, even my own children, all three of my kids have gone to Chinese school around here. When they go to this weekend school, they don't just learn how to read, they also learn how to write, and they have to practice writing. Even though I know it's kind of old-fashioned, it's not really sexy, I still strongly believe that you need to learn how to write in order to really have a grasp on the language. Now, part of learning how to recognize characters is learning the stroke order, which might seem painful at first. After some practice, though, this becomes natural to the point where you will know the stroke order automatically without even looking it up. Knowing the stroke order and how to write the character helps a lot with internalizing the character. It will also make you curious about the history of the characters. And of course, that opens up the world of Chinese calligraphy, where you will quickly realize that the only way to figure out the Cao Shu form of the characters is to know and understand the stroke order and the common writing abbreviations. By the way, this is one of the reasons why it is generally easier to start learning traditional characters and then move on to simplified characters once you've learned the traditional ones. Of course, the other reason why you really should be writing by hand is because it will help you be able to distinguish between extremely similar characters. This is where understanding stroke order and how characters are formed can actually be really helpful. So for example, there are some characters that are really easy to get confused. So you've got this one right here, ji. You see that in words like ziji, myself. It looks really similar to yi. You'll see yi in things like yi jing or already. Or if you have some more technical writing, you might see yi zhi, referring to something already known. And then you've got our good friend right here, si. Si just happens to be one of the 12 branches of the zodiac. And of course, if you're reading older literature, you will see 4时, which means between 9 and 11 a.m. on a modern clock. Now, the nice thing about learning Chinese is that those character compounds will help you out for the most part in a pinch. So for the most part, even if you forget the precise difference between two characters that look really, really similar, you can kind of tell which is which based on the idiom or phrase that is part of, or just based on like what it says. Like ziji is always going to be ziji, it's not going to be si or whatever. And this is why I strongly recommend that you learn characters as compounds, in other words, as words, instead of just studying individual characters. Now, you can find books out there that will teach you the most common Chinese characters one by one. There's this basic idea out there that I've seen in multiple places that says you need to know like 3,000 or 4,000 characters in order to be able to read fluently. But look more closely at that book on learning characters. You'll notice that there are quite a few compound words listed here as well. Now, actually, the sad truth about Chinese is that the vast majority of words consist of more than one character, and it's actually been that way for centuries. So when books in colloquial Chinese started popping up early in the Ming Dynasty, which is the point where there was an increase in literacy to the point where you could make a living selling books, the majority of the words in those books were more than one character. And that's why if you go read like the Dao De Jing, it's going to be completely different from reading something like Journey to the West. Now, if you're really going to learn the language, you're going to need to learn the actual words and phrases, not just individual characters, and I'll show you why. So if you're a beginner student, you probably know this word already, chuan. It means like a whole bunch of stuff, like to penetrate, to pierce through, to like string together, and so on. But the most common meaning is to wear, like wear clothes. Now, this character might be a little bit more complex for you, xiao. This character means to show filial piety, which is a phrase we don't use that much in English unless you're talking about Asian stuff. Basically, it means to show respect for your parents, almost like in a religious sense. Now, when you put the two of them together, you're not wearing filial piety. Instead, this has a very specific meaning. It means to wear mourning apparel, mourning like when you're going to a funeral. Anyway, there's this great descriptive line in Dream of the Red Chamber by Wang Chuan Xiao Jia Ren, which refers to a row of male servants dressed in bright white mourning clothing. But the thing is, if your approach to learning the language is just to learn a single character at a time, it's not going to make sense to you. And even here, you kind of have to have a deep understanding of the characters in the language, right? That phrase by Wang is actually not a standard Chinese phrase. You're not going to find it in a dictionary. If you do a Google search, you might find it. You'll find the quotation from Dream of the Red Chamber. So this phrase describes a deeply white group as deep and vast as like a body of water. That's what that Wang means. It's a really cool image when you understand it. You see, the thing about Chinese is that, like I said, is just like other languages. When you start hitting that literary register way up here, a lot of the rules of the language start to change, and you need to be able to focus less on just what this individual character means and more on the overall artistic picture that the author is painting. Even if you think you know a whole bunch of Chinese, you will still come across words with very specific meanings, like this word, mai jiang. This actually usually shows up in the negative phrase, bu mai jiang, which means something like, I'm not going to buy that, or I'm not going to go along with that. It's completely different from something like mai jiang, like buying a ticket for a train or something like that. Anyway, if you're trying to just learn a character at a time, you'll probably think that mai jiang means to buy like a mosquito net or a tent or something like that. And there are thousands upon thousands of specialized Chinese words and phrases that work just like this. Now, the only way that you're going to ever figure this stuff out is to learn the words as a unit rather than trying to learn every individual character. This also means that when you come across something in a book or in an essay or whatever that you don't understand, you need to look it up. Once upon a time, I had a Chinese literature teacher. He was not from China. He was like a guy like me, except he had a PhD. And he taught us that when we read, we should not use the dictionary at all and try to understand what it means from the context of the book or the article or something like that. Right? This is really, really bad advice. You need to have the dictionary. If you don't understand what it means, go look it up. If you don't have a paper dictionary, you're part of the 21st century, just look it up online. For the most part, you'll be able to find it, right? In other words, the way to understand this language is you have to look at the bigger puzzle of understanding characters in Chinese than just individual characters. You have to look at the words, you have to look at the phrases before you're going to get it. Anyway, this is one of the reasons why I really hate it when people ask me how many Chinese characters I know. As you probably already know, there are a bunch of websites out there where you can test yourself, though personally I think it's a total waste of time. The important thing is not to go up to a cute girl and say 2,600 characters like it says here. It's actually useless information and she'll probably say something to you that you won't understand anyway. Now the important thing, the thing you should care about is whether you can read authentic Chinese writing without using a dictionary. That means studying words, not just memorizing random characters. Now, I really, really mean this, by the way. There are all sorts of these bizarre traps that you'll find yourself stuck in if you start studying the wrong thing. And especially people new to the language are going to be like, this is cool, I'm going to learn this. You have to be really careful. If you want to learn the language, you need to spend time actually studying the language, not just learning crazy characters to show off with. So I think all learners of Chinese as a second language know about this character, biang, which looks really cool, but is actually entirely useless. You can find a whole bunch of complex characters, though the truth is that these are used so rarely that it's really not worth your time trying to learn them. The famous Empress Wu Zetian created a bunch of characters during her reign, including this one for Guo. The story behind this character and the other characters that she created is kind of interesting, but there's no practical purpose at all to learning them. There's 30 or so of these characters. You can learn them if you want, but there's really no reason to do so. And the other thing I got to say here is this is the reason why you don't want to take the dictionary and start learning one page after another. It sounds weird. I've tried that. You don't want to do it. It doesn't work, right? I've spent way too much time down these rabbit holes. What you want to do is you want to be reading something you're interested in and learn the language through what you're reading, right? It's just not worth it to try for these shortcuts and these weird books that will teach you 3,000 characters or whatever. The thing is, look, you only have so much time on Earth, and the only reason you should spend it learning creative characters from the 7th century AD or whatever is if you're doing historical research into that period of time and it's worth it for you to learn that. In other words, do not learn characters just to show off. Learn actual words because you want to learn the language and learn the language. Now, if you're using Anki to supplement your study, which I strongly recommend, or there's going to be other things similar, but I recommend Anki. You can do a lot with it. If you're using it, I'm going to show you here a couple things that you can do to teach yourself characters. This is what I do. All right, let's take a look at the cover here of Integrated Chinese, the 4th edition. Notice here how it talks about 听说读写, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. In the end, everything that this system gives you, the audio, the video clips, the flashcards, the electronic stuff, everything is focused on teaching you to listen, speak, read, and write. So I use the same philosophy in my Anki approach to studying Chinese, and I really, really think that you should do something similar. In other words, learning the characters that belong to a specific word really is not going to be enough. Reading the word is fine, but you need to be able to say it out loud. You should recognize the word when you hear it, even out of context, and you also need to learn how to write it. Anyway, as you know, Anki has two ways of dividing things up. You have notes and cards. Now this is really confusing, largely because the Anki manual is very poorly written and doesn't explain any of this clearly. After a couple of years of messing around with this stuff, my understanding is that notes are basically categories of cards. For example, I can stick all of my Chinese words together by creating a specific note category for them. Cards, meanwhile, are specific ways that the contents of the notes will be shown to you as you study, and card types are specific to individual notes. Again, this is extremely confusing because Anki comes with default note types that are distinguished by what their cards do. Basically, the easiest way to understand the database structure of Anki is to think of notes as like the big differentiator, right? So if I'm going to learn something that's a Chinese sentence, I have a specific Chinese sentence note set up. All of the things, the Chinese sentences I have in there create certain types of cards that you won't see in just Chinese, like Chinese words, right? So it will do some things with like certain cards that I've made, but there are other things that it won't do. Like it's not going to ask me to write a sentence by hand, for example. That would be a waste of time. Meanwhile, if I want to use the Chinese word, if I want to learn a Chinese word and learn a 2-character compound, well, I happen to have a specific note for that. That note will automatically create certain types of cards, which includes one for handwriting. Anyway, so that's the sort of note type that we're going to look at today, just the Chinese words. You can theoretically make an infinite number of card types, though I usually have like 4 or so. So one for the meaning, one for listening, one for reading out loud, and one for writing. Of course, I've got extra ones here for simplified characters. The meaning note type simply will ask me to tell what the meaning of a certain word is. It displays the character, sound, and pinyin on one side and only will ask me to fill in the meaning in English. This is basically the same thing as the most basic default Anki card, except that I'm showing a few extra fields. And remember, you only want a card to test you on one thing. You never want to make cards that ask you to do multiple things at once. Trust me, I have done this in the past. I have tried this. I've been the guy who was like, I'm going to learn it all at once. It's going to be great. I have an amazing mind and all this stuff. It doesn't work. If you try to do that, you're going to spend way too long in your Anki study. You're going to be forgetting things. You're going to end up feeling really frustrated in the end. The reason why is because the human mind works a lot better when it comes to taking information and knowledge in small pieces. You can do a lot of the work in your own brain to make connections between different things. People are very good at that, but when you're bringing the information in, the most effective way to do it is in the small pieces. Spatial recognition should always be done in bite-sized chunks, even if you consider yourself to be an expert on the subject. Reading is basically the same thing, except here I give myself the definition. I'm only testing myself on how to actually say the characters. And of course, I don't play the audio until after I've switched over to the back side of the card. Now, if you're like me, you're going to feel really self-conscious about reading things out loud, and especially in a foreign language. Now, honestly, this is something I struggle with even after 2 decades of learning Chinese. Now, the truth, though, is that you're never going to learn how to read it unless you learn how to read it, and you don't know how to read it unless you've read it out loud. As was the case with Latin thousands of years ago, Chinese was actually never intended to be read silently. Traditionally, you were supposed to read the words out loud as you went from character to character. And seriously, if Lin Daiyu is saying the words out loud when she's reading, you should be doing the same thing. So this is a little thing, sure, but if you do this, you will find that your linguistic ability will actually increase faster at a much more rapid pace than if you insist on doing everything silently and all up in your head. That's because you're using your additional senses to learn the words, learn the characters. The more of these different approaches you take, the more that you will be immersed in the world of the characters. And you really need to simulate that immersion if you're serious about reaching a high level of fluency in the language. Even if you're living in China or Taiwan, you still need to make sure that you're immersing yourself in it when you're doing your study. Anyway, I always add in a field for listening where I listen to the word and I have to then identify it. This is somewhat helpful for listening comprehension, though it will really work the best if you combine this with Anki cards that are complete sentences. I strongly recommend that you combine this with watching television shows and movies, and you get bonus points when you figure out a way to extract audio from those sources to make more Anki cards. Well, I'll talk a little bit more about how to create cards from full sentences in like TV shows and movies and stuff like that in a different video. But basically, the more that you expose yourself to authentic native speaker audio, the better off you're going to be, both in the short run and in the long run. Every single language is like this, by the way. I was reading something on Reddit the other day where somebody said the same thing about Japanese. I know from living there, the German's the same way, right? The stuff you'll see on a TV show will be much closer to how people really talk. And naturally, if you want the full authentic thing, you need to find like a reality show or something like that and try to get a script for that. Now, I'm not saying that textbooks are useless. They are not useless. But you need to get a feeling for the pace and the rhythm of the language as native speakers actually speak it in order to understand it. Anyway, now I'm going to show you 2 tricks that help me the most with character recognition and learning. The first is to create cards that require you to write Chinese characters by hand. And yeah, I know that this is really painful for some of you. I print out a bunch of these practice sheets and use them to write by hand. And I've got this PDF file up for free over on the blog, on the Dream of the Red Chamber blog, so go check out the link in the description. Anyway, the setup in Anki is pretty simple. I play the audio, I give myself the pinyin, I tell myself to write it down. After I write it once, I look on the back side of the card, I determine if I was right, I finish writing out 2 full lines, and I click on correct or incorrect. Now, it's pretty straightforward. So years back when I started to first learn Chinese, I had a whole bunch of small cards that I made up that were cut up from index cards. I was in college at the time, right? I would test myself in characters over and over again, especially since I had these Chinese tests coming up, right? Part of the test was you had to answer this question. To answer the question, you have to know how to write the character. So I had to learn how to write the character. Now, I know, because I did this, that testing myself on characters works, especially for these tests. And it works the best if you do it every single day instead of trying to cram. This is why we use Anki. But the cool thing about Anki is that the algorithm will learn what I know and what I don't know. In other words, if there's a character that I don't know how to write and I keep struggling with it and I'm honest with myself, the program will keep showing me that character until I learn it. This is something that is impossible to do with homemade index cards. Naturally, some characters are easier to learn than others. My philosophy is that you need to learn and practice all of the characters, whether you think they're easy or hard. And of course, you should learn both traditional and simplified Chinese, since both are actually really useful. Now, this approach works best if you're also actively reading Chinese or whatever your language is when you're not doing Anki. And seriously, the more time you can put into immersing yourself in the Chinese language, the better and more effective the method's going to be. Now, you have to be careful, right? Because if you think I'm going to read Chinese for 8 hours a day, you're going to go insane. You have to know how much you can stand, and you got to stand up, go walk around, go walk outside, go talk with somebody, go play with your dog, go watch my video on YouTube, whatever, right? But if your Chinese study actually is looking at an online article here and there and using an electronic dictionary for the few words you don't understand, you will make some progress, but you won't make lasting progress, right? You're going to make a lot more progress if you start targeting these areas that you're weak in and if you focus on making them stronger. Now, there's one more trick that I strongly recommend using that can help you a lot in character recognition. I call this a dictation card. This is designed to get me to type out a word or a phrase, and it requires me to actually recognize the characters in the computer's selection box. It looks complex, but it's actually really simple. This type thing here in the programming field is the key. Not very many people know that this is built into Anki, and it's actually a real powerful thing. It's really cool too when you get it working, and it will actually help your study quite a bit. And the thing is that you can use this with words in any language. It doesn't matter which language you're studying. It does 2 things for you, right? It will teach you how to type. If you're learning Korean, for example, the Korean alphabet on the keyboard is very, very easy to learn once you memorize it. And once you know it, you never forget it, right? But if you don't know it and you want to practice it, you can use it to practice, right? If you're learning Chinese and for some dumb reason you want to learn Bopo Mofo, right, which is what my wife uses, you can do the same thing. You can learn the Juin Fu Hao and where it is on the keyboard by setting it up like this in Anki, right? In other words, you can think of this type setting as your own personal spelling bee. This shows up as green when you get the answer right. And as the preview box shows up here, if you type something wrong, the program will tell you. This can be very helpful when you're trying to distinguish between multiple characters with the same pronunciation. And there are a lot of these out there, especially in classical Chinese. Anyway, like I said, I really recommend using this as well. You need all of the help that you can get when it comes to character recognition. Now, typing in the answer is actually really fast. The hard part's the handwriting part. That's where I spend most of my time every day. Well, my study time, right? I'll study for 45 minutes and maybe 20 minutes of it is me writing stuff out on paper. But the thing is, it really does work wonders, especially if you combine it with spending legitimate actual time actually reading in the language. Really, to get the full effect, you need to combine all of these approaches in one and make sure that you're also reading on your own and watching some TV. Plus, whatever you do, do not forget to take the time to watch television and movies and enjoy yourself. The best way to avoid burning out and feeling overwhelmed is to make sure that you make the language fun, and that means you have to have fun with the language. Anyway, there you have it. So I know I'm kind of like an old guy, right? Got the long beard and all this stuff. I'm going to tell you that back in the old days, 20 years ago, I wish that I had all of this stuff when I started learning this, right? Thing is that if you understand these tools and if you use the right approach and you make use of these tools, you will find yourself advancing from pure beginner, like knowing nothing, to an advanced learner in record time. Right? I'm serious, right? It works really well. It can be done. It does not take as much time as you think. And especially if you're focusing on learning these things in like little bite-sized chunks and just having yourself do one thing at a time, your brain will remember it, right? Your mind is capable of doing a lot more things than you think. So trust it, put it to the test. And above all, remember to have some fun with it, right? Don't worry about getting things wrong. I get things wrong all the time. You can ask my kids, right? They'll tell you that, my Chinese is pretty laughable. Anyway, there you have it. I'll talk with you guys again next week. Take care.